Nightcast. Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth brings you the current news from the world today and how it relates to Bible prophecy. Understanding the end-time events leading to the peaceful world tomorrow. Ladies and gentlemen, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth.
Greetings, friends, and welcome to this June 17, 2014 edition of Nightcast. Just as we were going off the air last night, friends, or just right after we went off the air, a news story broke out of the United States state of Nebraska, where twin tornadoes struck.
Touchdown in Nebraska. One tornado is bad enough. The power of two at once is unbelievable. It's a rare sight to see, and an extremely dangerous one too. A mile wide and just a mile apart, they barrel across the land. Nothing escapes destruction.
At once. Two massive wedges rotating.
Pilger is just northwest of Omaha. The county sheriff says the tornadoes wiped more than half the town off the map. Just look at the destruction that's left behind. There used to be homes here. Now it looks like a junkyard. The buildings that did survive are gutted. Trees and power lines have been brought down. In a matter of minutes, the lives of those from this small town of Pilger have been literally turned upside down. There's barely a square inch untouched by the tornadoes. The locals are trying to clear up the mess, but it will take months to repair the damage. Nebraska was the worst hit, but not the only casualty. South Dakota was saturated by heavy rains, and 80-mile-an-hour winds tore through towns. In Iowa, rivers burst their banks, sending dirty water surging into towns. The National Weather Service has already warned that more severe storms are forming, so it's definitely not over yet. Wendy Urquhart, BBC News.
And friends, that was the most interesting part of that, I think right at the end where Wendy Urquhart said, it ain't over yet, friends, not over yet. And, you know, since there were two of them, and they both had pretty much equal force, which is a rarity, it's happened before, but not too often. Could that possibly be a signal to us that unless people in this nation repent of their disobedience to our Creator, that double trouble is on its way? Just as God promises in Leviticus 26, verse 19, he says, I'll break the pride of your power. And in the rest of that chapter, and in Deuteronomy 28, a couple of chapters from the Bible that are known as the blessings and cursings chapters. Those chapters tell us, friends, when we obey God, we receive his blessings, which includes protection, and not only individually but collectively as a nation. And God says that as a nation you'll be the head, not the tail. You'll be the lender, not the borrower. And of course that applies individually too. God will bless you for obeying him. You know, your finances will be blessed. You'll be protected in things when other people's properties are not protected, who were not obeying God. And as a nation, the blessings really come in. But God says, on the other hand, if you disobey me, it's curses, just the opposite. You'll be the tail, not the head, the borrower, not the lender. Your enemies will chase you, and eventually I'll break the pride of your power when you're a big power like the United States, like God says in verse 19 of Leviticus 26. I'll just read that one verse real quickly, and then we have a lot of stories tonight, friend, a lot of things going on, so I do want to get to those quickly. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. Before Numbers, Leviticus 26, verse 19. And I will break the pride of your power, and I'll make your heaven as iron and your earth as brass. That means you'll be hard to grow things. I'll destroy your agricultural. That relates to the third seal. You'll suffer famine, and the breadbasket of the world will no longer be able to feed the rest of the world. And when the rest of the world has drought problems too, as many places around the world now are, that begins to become a catastrophe of the type where people become frustrated, and frustration is one of the elements which kicks off another round of major war. And the next major round of war is round 3 of World War, which will kick off the 5th seal, the Great Tribulation. All right, but I said we have a lot of news tonight, friends, and I've got some things to mention to you at the end if we have time regarding what's happening in Iraq. And but first we got, but let me just tell you this, on this story we just played, at least one person was killed, just summarizing what happened with that tornado activity related to this pale horse. That the pale horse is not only disease epidemics, Jesus Christ also described events that would happen from the 4th seal to the 5th seal as loimos, the disease epidemics and pestilence and plagues of Egypt, but he also said seismas, commotions in the air, commotions on the ground. And these commotions in the air include gale forces, such as these twin tornadoes that struck in Nebraska and that are expected that type of weather to continue. We're going to hear more news possibly related to that. But in Nebraska, at least one person was killed, 19 others injured when those 2 massive tornadoes hit the U.S. state of Nebraska. The town of Pilger, about 100 miles northwest of Omaha, 160 kilometers northwest of Omaha, with a population of 350 people, was devastated by the twisters, as you saw, as Wendy Urquhart reported in the video. Now, friends, next we'll go to what's happening related to Benghazi, where the U.S. have seized the Benghazi raid ringleader, they say.
The story broke on the Washington Post website just a short while ago, and nobody really seems to be disputing the central facts here, that this man, Ahmed Abu Khatala, who has been much sought after as one of the ringleaders, suspected ringleaders of the attack on the American compound in Benghazi. He was one of more than a dozen people who were the subject of charges laid here in Washington, D.C. Earlier this year. But all of the others remain at large at the moment. But there are clearly some people in the State Department and in the White House, indeed, who are very happy to hear that this man, Khatala, does now appear to be in U.S. custody.
Yeah, still, of course, very much a burning issue, isn't it, within the United States as to what happened and how. So I suppose his apprehension is quite an important moment. Do we know where he is?
What we do know is that he is in American custody. They're saying that he is not in Libya at the moment. He was captured at the weekend, and it's thought that he might be being questioned, David, offshore somewhere before being brought here to Washington, D.C. and brought before the courts. It will obviously be an extremely newsworthy event when that happens. There will be a lot of interest in that. You're absolutely right. There's been enormous interest in this whole matter, resulting largely from the fact that the Republicans have basically brought so many questions about the circumstances surrounding that attack in 2012. There have been numerous inquiries, some of them still ongoing, into the details surrounding the incident. And of course, it cost the life of the U.S. ambassador, Christopher Stevens, and 3 other American personnel. So a lot of criticism. People here on the right wing, particularly, saying that this was that the administration was at fault for basically leaving the embassy there unprotected.
And friends, just to summarize a little bit here, let's see, are we freezing up or is there we go. It was the suspected ringleader in the September 2012 raid on a U.S. diplomatic post in Benghazi in Libya who's been captured, according to the Pentagon. Ahmed Abu Khatala was taken into custody in a secret raid in Libya on what's today? It was 2 days ago. Today's the 17th. Happened. They did the raid on the 15th. Today's Tuesday, so that would have been Sunday. The assault in Benghazi 2 years ago, as you know, friends, killed 4 Americans, including U.S. Ambassador Chris Stevens. And with the video report we just had, that was David Willis. Now, in our next report related to the Iraq conflict is Baquba, the new jihadist frontier.
Iraqi forces are taking the fight to the Sunni extremists. In Kirkuk, they were using tanks to target ISIS fighters. But even heavy armour can't halt the violence spreading through swathes of the country. We travelled out of Baghdad north towards the city of Baquba, the new front line for the ISIS jihadists, and just 60 kilometres away. This is one of the main routes into Baghdad, and behind me, about 30 kilometres in the distance, is the city of Baquba, and we're told that ISIS forces have already entered parts of the city. And of course, if they take Baquba, then it's a clear route into the capital. We went as far as we were told it was safe to go, to meet Ali, who lives in Baquba.
And go in Sulaimania and down in Diyala.
So you're running away from ISIS?
Yes.
And he's witnessed the fighting. He told me it was going to be a bloody fight between Sunni and Shia, and he warned it would soon be happening in Baghdad too. Ibrahim Salman Khalaf also had a narrow escape. Now back home with his family, he's a policeman injured while fighting the Sunni extremists in Samarra. Thankful that, unlike some of his comrades, he's lived to tell the tale. He says ISIS are ruthless.
They shot at a convoy of civilians. One of them shot at the tyres of a bus and killed everyone in it. The bus was carrying 24 men, and they killed them all.
Ibrahim doesn't believe that ISIS are strong enough to take Baghdad. But today another bomb went off in the city centre, killing 3 people. Even if ISIS have not yet reached the city, there are signs that their sympathisers are already here. Jonathan Beale, BBC News, Baghdad.
And friends, the Secretary of Foreign Affairs, the Foreign Secretary William Hague in the UK, has said that the UK has plans to reopen the British embassy in Tehran as an important step forward in relations with Iran. Interesting how both the United States and the UK are kind of making alliances with Iran, who would seriously trouble Israel. But in this video, you'll hear Mr. Hague, who says the circumstances were right following an improvement in bilateral relations in recent months. Full diplomatic relations with Iran were suspended after attacks on the British embassy in Iran in 2011. Nick Robinson reports.
What a difference 3 years can make. This was the British Embassy in Tehran in November 2011. A mob ransacked offices, smashed pictures of the Queen and chanted death to England. The building's been closed ever since, but that's about to change, along with this country's troubled relationship with Iran.
It's right, step by step, with a clear eye, with a hard head, to rebuild that relationship. Now, we'd be doing that anyway, irrespective of what is happening in Iraq.
But what is happening in Iraq is what has helped convince the West to improve relations with neighbouring Iran. These are pictures of the Sunni extremist group ISIS, which is now fighting just 40 miles from Baghdad.
This is the most serious threat to Britain's security that there is today. The number of foreign fighters in that area, the number of foreign fighters, including those from the UK, who could try to return to the UK. This is a real threat to our country.
And this is the man Britain and the United States hope they can do business with. President Rouhani, once a student in Glasgow, who used his Twitter account to show he's a different sort of Iranian leader, a man who watches his team play in the World Cup and tweets, "Proud of our boys."
Checking our top stories, nearly 300 armed American forces are being positioned in and around Iraq.
This morning in America, people awoke to the news that they're having to think the previously unthinkable.
The White House also talking about working with Iran, who has been an adversary.
The history of the rift between the US and Iran dates all the way back to the Islamic Revolution 35 years ago, and the capture of 52 American hostages, only freed after 444 days. Even without all that history, there would be problems, not least this, Iran's nuclear program. Peaceful, they say, others are not so sure, and in the Commons express their doubts about how far any new relationship should go.
While we should welcome the resumption of diplomatic relations with Tehran and normalization, is it not necessary to reassure our closest allies in the Middle East that there are very severe limits for the foreseeable future as to the kind of relationship we can have with Iran? Is it not in fact going to be the kind of relationship the West had with the Soviet Union during the Cold War?
On the streets of the Iranian capital, the British embassy stands empty, waiting for the diplomats to return. Students here aren't protesting today. This one says, good relations with the people and the countries of the world can have a great positive effect on the advancement of our country. You know the old saying, my enemy's enemy is my friend. It's a cliche, of course, but that's because it's so often been proved true. Today, Iran didn't become a friend of Britain's. She certainly became a little less of an enemy. Nick Robinson, BBC News, Westminster.
And friends, in Sri Lanka, 3 Muslims are reported to have been killed in clashes with hardline Buddhists in southern Sri Lanka. For the past 2 years, Sinhalese Buddhist groups have been staging anti-Muslim demonstrations, but these fatalities are the worst outbreak of sectarian violence in recent years. Charles Haviland reports from Aluthagama in western Sri Lanka.
Chinese Prime Minister Li Keqiang's just gone into Downing Street for talks with David Cameron. But on the other side of Whitehall here, we've got...
All right, let me stop and back that one up. Friends, I don't have any head notes for it, but while we're coming out of a story related to the UK, let's stay with the UK for a moment, because today in the UK, one of China's big leaders came over, and so in the background behind this reporter you see a lot of very well organized protest. The first group of people there are going to be the Vietnam people who are upset with China over those troubled waters, the South China Sea waters and the islands there, and with China building a school, as we reported last night, on those islands. Here's the story now.
Chinese Prime Minister Li Keqiang's just gone into Downing Street for talks with David Cameron. But on the other side of Whitehall here, we've got people who want to deliver a message to the Chinese government, but are not getting the opportunity. At the front here, we've got the Vietnamese protesting about what they see as Chinese invasion of their territory in the South China Sea. Up here, the Tibetans, some are complaining that their religious rights, their human rights and their environment are being destroyed by China. Some of them are wearing Li Keqiang masks here. Further on, a religious community called Falun Gong, who say that their rights are being oppressed in China and that their prisoners are being abused in Chinese detention. Further up, there's a competing demonstration. Those who want to make the point that China is welcome in the UK and who want to focus on what they see as the positives between London and Beijing.
Okay, she did a very good job with that report, in spite of the fact that for a moment there, some of the groups were kind of drowning her out. Those of you that did that, you lost your public news on that, because nobody could hear what she was saying. But we got the most of it there. And friends, now let's go on to that next report that I was telling you about with Charles Haviland reporting from Aluthagama in western Sri Lanka.
They still smoulder many hours after they were burned. Homes from which Muslims fled in advance, knowing of the rampage to come. Hundreds of hardline Buddhists tore through the neighborhood, torching Muslim dwellings. Some Sinhalese houses were attacked by Muslim mobs, though fewer. This Sinhalese woman said all the attackers were outsiders. Muslims and Sinhalese get on well, she said, and many others say the same. But this is where 3 Muslims were shot dead by night, according to their neighbours and family. The police are now telling us that we must not pass behind this cordon that has been put up, dividing the mainly Muslim quarter from the ethnically mixed area where the worst of the clashes took place and where bullets such as this one were fired. At the local mosque there's more blood where some injured people were sheltered, and a lot of security forces, and a visit by a Muslim cabinet minister in contrite mood.
I cannot simply exculpate myself from the guilt that I have failed my people at a time like this.
The minister also blamed his own government for letting the extremist group, the Buddhist Brigade, hold a rally filled with hate speech on Sunday in Alutgama. Here its leader, a firebrand monk, threatened what he called the end of Muslims if they attacked monks or Sinhalese. And so right now, Muslims are living in fear.
If they come in thousands, we have no way. We have no way to answer. So only thing we have to die, that's all.
The president has said the guilty in these riots will be brought to account, but his critics accuse the strongly Buddhist government of tacitly backing the extremism. The violence certainly places a big question mark over the government's continuous assertions that it's working for reconciliation. Charles Haviland, BBC News, Alutgama.
You know, friends, one of the most interesting things about some of these news stories that you hear about one religious group killing another religious group is, you compare that, contrast that to the teachings of Jesus Christ in the Bible, the Holy Bible. He says to love your enemies, do good to those that hate you. You know, these killing of the Muslims by the Buddhists, the killings of the one group of people in Iraq by another group of people in Iraq, all religious related. Very contrary to what the Bible teaches. And news from Cambodia tonight. The number of Cambodians leaving Thailand, well, I should say Cambodia and Thailand, because the number of Cambodians leaving Thailand has soared to more than 120,000 in recent days, according to officials there. Many fear Thailand's new military rulers are about to crack down on migrant workers, which Bangkok denies. Cambodian authorities are now reportedly preparing to deal with the influx. The new figure is a significant proportion of the number of Cambodians in Thailand, estimated to be at least 150,000. Jonathan Head has this report.
Now, this is a military checkpoint about 30 kilometres from the Thai-Cambodian border, and all the Cambodian migrant workers heading home have to stop here to register. And the soldiers told us that the numbers over the past week have increased enormously. And I have to say the Thai officials here were very jovial and relaxed with them. They kept the atmosphere quite light. But a lot of these Cambodians were visibly nervous of the soldiers, and none of them would talk to us about why they were leaving. It took around 20 to 30 minutes before they were able to carry on with their journeys, so not too long a wait in what's pretty hot and humid weather. Their first stop after crossing the border is the dusty little town of Phoi Phet. There isn't much there apart from some swanky casinos. It's far too small really to cope with these numbers, up to 40,000 a day over the weekend. As you can see, they're being brought in by buses and sometimes on Thai military trucks. And once they've got themselves and all their possessions off those trucks and buses, they have to go off and search for a ride that will take them back to their hometowns and villages. Now, it looks pretty chaotic here, but over the last few days, international organisations, local NGOs, the Cambodian government and the Cambodian military have got a sort of system going, providing a constant stream of trucks and buses that can take people on. So the system is working. One man who's been in the thick of it all is Brett Dixon, the local representative for the International Organisation for Migration.
The issues here is it's such a bottleneck. We were quickly overwhelmed, lack of transport to transport people out quickly and in the most orderly way we could. The military machinery kicked in from the Cambodian government, which helped a lot. We've switched to focus more on the most vulnerable migrants, women with young children, and we've been chartering buses in to bus them to their provinces in the most safe way we can.
These numbers are unusual, aren't they?
They're extremely unusual. On an average day, you might get 150 people being returned through the immigration channels because they're undocumented and being deported back to Cambodia. So it's a very unusual event, almost at crisis point in terms of having the resources to deal with it.
So how long will this go on? Well, there are thought to have been around 500,000 Cambodians working in Thailand, both legal and illegal. Now, the new military government here insists it's only going after illegal workers. But the fear that somehow they're targeting Cambodians, that they're not welcome, has now really set in, and it's possible many more Cambodians will try to leave.
Okay, friends, we'll go next to Kenya, where at least 12 women have been abducted during the latest attack on Kenya's coast.
This is the road that leads from Mpeketoni to Poromoko. Yet another incident took place there last night. We understand that at least 20 people were killed and around 12 women are missing. Now, the residents of this area feel unsafe and they're saying that the government isn't doing enough, and that is why they have set up this roadblocks. We're told this is just one of several along this road because they feel that it's time to take matters into their own hands.
We've got the bases of the Kenya Army, Kenya Air Force and Kenya Navy just right beyond here. It's not even far, just like some few kilometers away from here. And so if maybe after the action which happened that particular night, they would have come already. Within the time which the effect happened, they would have already happened to come. So we didn't see anything, as in they didn't even do anything.
The attack at Mpeketoni has brought residents together. This crowd has come to witness as a politician donates foodstuff and bedding to those who are affected by those attacks. And now right there is a tent that is being used as a temporary morgue. This hospital, Mpeketoni Hospital, is operating beyond capacity. It has never had to deal with this number of casualties. And so I counted more than 10 bodies there. There's no refrigeration. And so parts of that tent have been opened just to let air in.
Okay, and thank you, Ann Soy, for that devastating report in Kenya. Friends, I showed you one video earlier from the UK, how a leader from China is coming there, and it's the Chinese premier who's arrived in the UK for a 3-day visit to promote Chinese-UK relations.
Once the heart of a trading empire, now London's Royal Albert Docks are set to rise again. This time not as British Empire, but Chinese. A £1 billion regeneration project to build an Asian trading hub for Europe.
Britain saw the Chinese companies were about to go global and opened wide its doors to welcome us in. This is what's far-sighted about the UK.
If that was China on Thames, this is the Milton Keynes of the East. China's throwing up cities faster than anyone in history, but also more smog-ridden and gridlocked. So while it doesn't want help building them, it does want cutting-edge ideas on how to make them better.
But ultimately for the mayor of the city.
Macy Lake Eco-City is the brainchild of a British urban planner, a pilot that 200 other cities are being told to learn from. But why British architects and engineers?
We urbanised first in Britain, and through that developed an enormous amount of expertise. And I think we're also very innovative, particularly in the urban area, engineering and design in particular.
But beneath the smooth surface, Chinese business culture is complicated, and political winds can change fast. A cautionary tale. Mark Riley, once China boss for British pharmaceuticals giant GlaxoSmithKline, here in Hunan, police have accused him of authorising bribes to doctors. Nearly a year after the investigation began, we've seen no trials and we don't even know where Mark Riley or the other detainees are being held. Likewise, another British businessman, Peter Humphrey, shown here on Chinese TV admitting unspecified crimes. No charge, no trial, whereabouts unknown.
You know, friends, that sounds like some things that should be, that investigation is because of bribing doctors by the pharmaceutical firms. You know, that's a crime over there. That ought to be a crime in the United States, which just happens openly all the time. And so drugs and things, medicines that are bad for people get promoted prematurely, and a lot of people die from it. But the major part of this story, the UK has become the 4th most popular destination for Chinese investment, with the premier, expected to sign £18 billion worth of business deals. And that was Kerry Gracie with that video report. Now, friends, another video related to this Chinese premier discussing trade with the British Prime Minister. I think you'll find this report very interesting.
Again, this isn't Britain, but China. Thames Town, as it's known, is a development on the outskirts of Shanghai, complete with clock towers, cobbles, and its very own Winston Churchill statue. British history and culture have had a huge impact on the world, this couple tell me. They're among the thousands who come to Thames Town for their wedding photos. I like British style a lot, this man agrees. I'm longing to visit, he says, so's my wife. Romance is in the air, but if the Chinese are keen, then Britain is positively head over heels. David Cameron's visit last year was all part of an effort to woo Chinese investment and boost British exports. Thames Town has its very own pub, of course, but on closer inspection, despite the familiar, welcoming exterior, it's just a facade. The same has sometimes been said of the UK-China relationship. The Prime Minister's meeting in 2012 with the Dalai Lama, the spiritual leader of Tibet, a man considered by China to be a dangerous separatist, led to a chill in diplomatic relations. Today, although China's human rights record is, in theory, still on the table, the focus is without doubt on its huge and still rapidly growing economy. Chinese money is being sought for UK infrastructure projects like railways and nuclear power. Two-way trade last year was worth a record £43 billion. But behind the scenes, tensions lurk, On the one hand, the rising communist power, and on the other, the former colonial one. And there's no doubt about who needs who the most today. One state-run newspaper recently described the UK as just an old European country apt for travel and study. John Sudworth, BBC News, Thames Town, Shanghai.
And friends, we are going just a little bit longer tonight. I have just a couple more important videos to show you. The one we just showed you comes as China is pouring more and more money into British infrastructure developments. And that was, as you saw, BBC correspondent John Sudworth reporting from the Fa English village of Thames Town outside of Shanghai. Now, in Israel, we have had a story the past few days on the missing teenagers who were on this road you see in this video. When they disappeared, they were hitchhiking. The BBC's Yolande Nell has traveled the road where it's believed the 3 young Israelis were kidnapped on Thursday last week. 2 were 16, 1 was 19. They went missing at a junction near the city of Hebron as they hitchhiked their way home.
We're driving along Route 60 in the occupied West Bank. and it was very close to this busy road that the 3 missing Israeli teenagers were last seen. The road links Jerusalem behind me to the city of Hebron, and all along it there are Jewish settlements in between the Palestinian towns and villages. This is a part of the West Bank where tensions often run very high. And yet you can see it's very common for young Israelis here to stop Israeli cars and get a ride. It's thought that 3 teenagers got into a vehicle together last Thursday and were kidnapped.
And I hope they'll be found soon, and I hope they're alive. I mean, everybody prayed for that. And they're young kids. What do they want to do? They just want to go back from their school to their house for Shabbat, for the weekend.
Well, everyone was worried, sick, kept on praying all the time. It's the only thing people talk about.
We've come further along Route 60 now to one of the main turnoffs into the city of Hebron. And all along the way, we've seen plenty of evidence of Israel's military build-up in the West Bank. More Israeli soldiers, more armoured vehicles than you'd see normally. And these Palestinian cars are waiting in line because there's also, just over here, a new Israeli roadblock that's been set up. All of the cars going in and out of Hebron are being searched as part of this huge search operation. We've been speaking to some of the Palestinian drivers here about how they see the situation.
Maybe things will get worse. It depends how the Israeli army sees it. We are powerless people. When people see the army, their emotions will rise.
And that's really the ongoing worry here, that the latest developments will lead to a new, dangerous escalation in tensions between Israel and the Palestinians.
And friends, that last comment by Yolande Nail, and thank you, Yolande. I'm going to show you another video as to why what she's saying may well be true and why this may have a lot of impact, a lot of brouhaha come out of this. Because this next video will show you how the Israeli army, who's reporting this themselves, says it has arrested about 80 Palestinians as part of efforts to find those 3 Israeli teenagers missing from the West Bank. Israel said on Saturday that the 3 had been kidnapped by a terror group. The students went missing near an Israeli settlement north of Hebron on their way back home from evening lessons. Quentin Somerville has this report.
Israel is gripped by this story, fearing the worst in terms of the fate of these 3 young men. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said that he believes that Hamas, the Islamist militant group, are behind what he describes as the kidnapping of the 3 boys. But as I say, facts on the ground are very difficult to come by because so little has been seen or heard of the boys since that disappearance. The big fear here is, though, that aside from the safety of the 3 boys, as you say, 2 are 16 and 1 is 19, is that this could escalate tensions between Israel and Palestinians because those relations are already in pretty poor shape. And we've seen in the past when there have been kidnappings, when there have been kidnappings of Israeli soldiers, that quickly escalated into violent confrontation between both sides. Hamas have said in the past that they support and have been responsible for the kidnapping of Israeli citizens, but it's very unusual that we've seen 3 young men, civilians who were unarmed, to have been taken in this way if it is subsequently proven that they were kidnapped.
And friends, in closing up tonight, sometimes when we go more than a half hour, I just turn it into a 45-minute program, sometimes a whole hour, but we're just a little shy of 40 minutes right now, and I want to show you a map. This map of Iraq, mostly Iraq, shows part of Syria. Also, the yellow-colored area in this map shows you where ISIS has been active, where the jihadists who have been doing these attacks starting in Mosul have been active, and you see they have a big path over into Israel. Syria, up at the top left side of the map. And as they came on over into Iraq, you can see when they hit Mosul, they just worked their way down south along the Tigris River and down into Baghdad. Now they stop about there. That we're only looking at about half of Iraq. There's about the southern half of Iraq is below where you see the picture of the map, and the ISIS fighters are not down there in the south. They stop right there at Baghdad, but they notice how they follow along the Tigris River. That's pretty strategic. They've used a lot of strategy in their fighting. They've been using hit and run tactics, complex ambushes, surprise raids. Mosul was their first city they hit, and that's the northernmost dot up there on the map, the little red dot northernmost on this map. And Mosul is a key gateway for foreign fighters to enter into the country of Iraq. Now, the ISIS militants have been taking advantage of the momentum they gained since conquering was just the major part of Mosul. And while they've had this momentum, once they got this momentum, it left and once they did this surprise type attack, it left the Iraqi government scrambling to recover from significant losses. Many of the army abandoned posts, they abandoned equipment, they abandoned uniforms, and it shows some serious structural and morale issues within the Iraqi army. A high number of the military, the Iraqi army are Sunni soldiers in the Iraqi government ranks, unwilling to stand up to ISIS. And ISIS was not only able to take a large part of the city of Mosul, but they seized weapons, they seized vehicles, they seized the central bank assets in Mosul, the contents of that bank. No, they also in Mosul, they freed thousands of prisoners, so they gained more fighters in that way. And stretching from Mosul in the north, or actually north of Mosul, and they on down through south to Tikrit and on down to Baghdad. They've been hugging closely a stretch along the Tigris River, striving to maintain a continuous line of pressure running through what you might call the northern spine of populated Iraq. In that area that they are active in, there's an oil refinery near Baji, which is still under government control at this time, but that's one of several strategic energy areas in the long stretch of area where ISIL or ISIS is operating, which is basically the same areas where Al-Qaeda in Iraq was active during the height of the Sunni insurrection in Iraq from 2004 to 2006, or 2004, 2006, 2008. So you could say that ISIL's actions reflect a resurgence into historical areas of operation. They are likely to continue to push forward, but ISIL or ISIS, one of the abbreviations is ISIL or ISIL, ISIL, which stands for the Iraqi in Iraq. Let's see, what's the S for? Oh, let's see, friends, I'm losing it here. I'll get that for you later. But they largely seek to avoid stand-up fights against well-equipped and determined Iraqi units. But having said that, bear in mind that ISIL or ISIS have held their ground against forces in Al-Fallujah and Ar-Ramadi. They are mobile and rapidly dispersed. That gives them an advantage over the slower mechanized units of the Iraqi army. And the resources of the Iraqi army are just being stretched to overwhelming limits, in that the geographical dispersion of the threats posed by ISIS or ISIL outmatches the resources of the Iraqi army. Of course, you've been hearing how the United States is supplying equipment and may do more, and so may the UK, because this thing has extremely tremendous impact on what will happen in the area. It also can work as a tremendous threat against Israel. And one thing, they're in alliance with the leadership in Syria, and Israel has, for a long time, has been saying the current leadership in Syria, as bad as it is, as long as it stays with limited power, Israel stays more secure. If the present Syrian leadership gets knocked out, Israel says, woo, we got a problem on our hands. And of course, the problems in Israel are tending to grow, and this kidnapping thing has, the way this is coming, as you heard in the reports, has potential for much more frustration and conflict to rise out of it. Friends, that's it for our Tuesday night report. We went a little longer tonight. God willing, and the creek don't rise. We'll be back again tomorrow night, Wednesday evening, with the day's current news related to the Bible and prophecy here on Nightcast. Until next time, your host, Stephen Lloyd, saying good night, friends.
You have been watching Nightcast with Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth. Nightcast can be seen Sunday through Thursday nights here on cogtv.org. Tonight's program is also available anytime on demand in the cogtv.org video archive.